Chapter Introduction. Episode 26, Establishing New Rules, and each day 10 of them were inspected. The 4 friends gathered in a circle, and in its middle was placed the little girl, dressed as she had been seized. The procuress responsible for her capture recited her history. If something of the conditions of high birth or virtue were wanting, the inquiry went no deeper. The child was forthwith rejected, without appeal, and sent on her way, and the purveyor lost all that she had spent in connection with her. Next, having provided all the vital particulars, the procuress was asked to retire, and the child was interrogated in order to determine whether what had just been alleged were true. If all seemed well, the procuress was called in again, and she lifted the girl's skirts from behind so as to expose her buttocks to the group. This was the first thing it wished to examine. The slightest defect in this part was grounds for immediate rejection. If, on the contrary, naught were amiss here, she was ordered to strip, or was stripped, and naked she passed and passed again, 5 or 6 times over, from one of our libertines to the other. She was turned about, she was turned the other way, she was fingered, she was handled, they sniffed, they spread, they peeped. They examined the state of the goods. Was it new? Was it used? But did all this coolly and without permitting the senses' illusion to upset any aspect of the examination. This done, the child was led away, and beside her name inscribed upon a ballot, the examiners wrote passed or failed, and signed their names. These ballots were then dropped into a box, the voters refraining from communicating their opinions to one another. All the girls examined. The box was opened. In order to be accepted, a girl had to have our 4 friends' names in her favor. The absence of one name was enough to exclude her instantly, and in every instance, inexorably, as I have said. The unsuitable ones were kicked directly out, set at large, alone and without a guide, save when, as happened with perhaps a dozen, our libertines frolicked with them, after the choices had been made, and before turning them over to their procuresses. This round resulted in the exclusion of 50 candidates. The other 80 were gone over afresh, but with much greater exactitude and severity. The least defect warranted instantaneous dismissal. One, lovely as the day, was weeded out because one of her teeth grew a shade higher from the gum than the rest. More than 20 others were refused because they were daughters of nothing better than bourgeois. 30 were eliminated during this second round, hence only 50 were left. The friends resolved not to continue to the third round until having first being relieved of some fuck through these 50 aspirants' own ministry. This in order that the senses' perfect calm could ensure saner and sounder choice. Each of the quartet encompassed himself by a team of 12 or 13 children. Members of each team adopted varying attitudes. Teams were shifted. Everything was brought off with such dexterity. There was, in a word, so much lubricity in the doing that sperm flow, temperatures subsided, and another 30 disappeared from the race. 20 remained. That was still a dozen too many. Further expedients to procure calm were resorted to. Every means wherefrom one would suppose disgust could be borne was employed, but the 20.
Chapter Introduction. Episode 27, Who May Enter the Fortress, still remained. And how might one have subtracted from a number of creatures so wonderfully celestial, you would have declared they were the very work of a divinity. Equal in beauty, something else had to be discovered which could at least award 8 of them some kind of superiority over the 12 others. And what the president then proposed was worthy indeed of all the disorder of his mind. That made no difference. The suggestion was accepted. It had to do with finding out which of them would best do something the chosen 8 would be often called upon to do. 4 days sufficed amply to decide this question. And at last, 12 were given their leave, but not blankly as in the case of the others. They provided a week's complete and exhaustive amusement, then were put into the keeping of the procuresses, who soon made a pretty penny from the prostitution of creatures as distinguished as these. As for the successful 8, they were installed in a convent to keep until the day of departure, and in order to reserve until the designated period the pleasure of enjoying them, the 4 colleagues did not touch them before then. I'll not be so foolhardy as to attempt to describe these beauties. They were all of them superior in an equal degree. My brushstrokes would necessarily be monotonous. I shall be content to give their names, and to affirm that upon my word, it is perfectly impossible to obtain an idea of such an assemblage of graces, of attractions, of perfections, and that had nature wished to give man an idea of what her greatest and wisest art can create, she would not have presented him with other models. The first was named Augustine. She was 15, the daughter of a Languedoc baron, and had been kidnapped from a convent in Montpellier. The second was named Fanny. She was the daughter of a councillor to the Parliament of Brittany, and had been abducted from her father's own chateau. The third was named Zelmire. She was 15 years old. She was the Comte de Terville's daughter, and he idolized her. He had taken her hunting with him on one of his estates in Beauce, and having left her alone in the forest for a moment, she had been pounced upon at once. She was only a child, and with a dowry of 400,000 francs, was the following year to have married a very great lord. It was she who most wept and grieved at the horror of her fate. The fourth was named Sophie. She was 14, and was the daughter of a rather well-to-do gentleman who lived on his estate in Berry. She had been seized while on a walk with her mother, who, seeking to defend her, was flung into a river, where she expired before her daughter's eyes.
Chapter Introduction. Episode 28. The Selection Criteria. The 5th was named Colombe. She was from Paris, the child of a councillor to Parliament. She was 13, and had been kidnapped while returning in the evening to her convent with a governess, after leaving a children's ball. The governess had been stabbed to death. The 6th was named Hebe. She was just 12, the daughter of a cavalry captain, a nobleman who lived in Orleans. The youngster had been enticed and carried away from the convent where she was being brought up. 2 nuns had been bought. You could not hope to find anything more seductive or sweeter. The 7th was named Rosette. She was 13, and was the child of the Lieutenant General of Chalon-sur-Saône. Her father had just died. She was with her mother in the countryside near the city, and was captured within sight of her relatives by agents disguised as thieves. The last was named Mimi or Michette. She was 12. She was the daughter of the Marquis de Senonches, and had been kidnapped on her father's estate in the Bourbonnais, while on a carriage drive, which she had been allowed to take with 2 or 3 women from the chateau. The women were murdered. It will be remarked that the preparations for these revels cost much money and many crimes. To such people, treasure means exceedingly little, and as for crime, one was then living in an age when it was not by any means probed and punished the way it is nowadays. Hence everything succeeded, and so prettily that, the inquests amounting to virtually nothing at all, our libertines were never troubled by consequences. The time drew nigh for the examination of the little boys. Easier to obtain, their number was greater. The pimps produced 150 of them, and it will surely be no exaggeration if I affirm that they at least equaled the little girls, as much in their innocence and their elevated rank. 30,000 francs were paid for each of them, the same sum given for the girls, but the entrepreneurs risked nothing, because this game being more delicate and far more to the taste of our epicures, it had been decided that no one would be put in danger of losing his expenses, that while the lads with whom it was impossible to come to terms would be rejected, as they would be put to some use, they would also be paid for. Their examination was conducted like that of the girls. 10 were verified each day, but with the very wise precaution, which had been a little too much neglected, with the girls. With the precaution, I say, of always preceding the examination by a discharge arranged with the aid of the 10 who were under present scrutiny. The others were half of a mind to bar the president from the ceremony. They were wary of the deprivation of his tastes. They had feared in the selection of Chapter Introduction, Episode 29. The first group, chosen the girls, being made the dupes of his accursed predilection for infamy and degradation. He promised to keep himself in check, and if he kept his word, it is unlikely he did so without difficulty. For when once a damaged or diseased imagination becomes accustomed to these species of outrages against good taste and nature, outrages which so deliciously flatter it, it is no easy matter to restore such a person to the path of righteousness. It seems as if the desire to satisfy his longing displaces reason in his judgments. Scorning what is truly beautiful, no longer cherishing but what is frightful, desire's pronouncements correspond to its criteria, and the return to truer sentiments would appear to him to be a wrong done those principles whence he should be most sorry to stray. 100 hopefuls were found unanimously approved when the initial séances were over, and these decisions had to be 5 times reconsidered in order to arrive at the small group alone to be accepted. Thrice in succession, 50 survived the balloting, and then, to reduce that number to the stipulated 8, the jurors were compelled to resort to unusual measures in order somehow to lessen the appeal of idols, still glamorous, despite everything they had been able to do to them. The idea occurred to them to dress the boys as girls. 25 were eliminated by this trick, which, lending to a sex they worshipped the garb of one to which they had become indifferent, depreciated their value and ruined almost all the illusion. But nothing could alter the voting on the 25 that were left. 'Twas all in vain. In vain they spattered their fuck about. In vain they wrote their names upon the ballots at the same moment they discharged. In vain they put to use the expedient adopted with the little girls. The 25 proved irreducible every time, and at last they agreed to have them draw lots. Here are the names they gave the lucky ones who remained, their age, their birth, and a word or two about their adventures, their portraits. I cry off. Cupid's own features were surely no more delicate, and the models Albani sought, from which to choose traits for his divine angels, must certainly have been inferior by far. Zelimir was 13 years old. He was the only son of a gentleman out of Poitou, who had been bringing him up with the greatest care. Escorted by a single domestic, he had been sent to Poitiers to visit a kinsman. Our rogues ambushed them, slew the domestic, and made off with the child. Cupidon was the same age. He had been a pupil in a school at La Flèche, and was the son of a gentleman dwelling in the vicinity of that town. A trap was laid for the boy. He was kidnapped while on an outing the students used to take on Sundays. He was the prettiest pupil in the entire college. Narcisse was 12. He was a Knight of Malta. He had been abducted in Rouen, where his father. Chapter Introduction, Episode 30. The second group chosen filled an honorable post compatible with his nobility. The boy was en route to the Collège de Louis le Grand at Paris. He was waylaid and seized while on the road. Zephyr, the most delicious of the 8, it being supposed that their excessive beauty might allow the possibility of a choice, was from Paris. He was pursuing his studies there, in a famous pension. His father, a ranking officer, did all in his power to get his son back, and failed. Money had seduced the headmaster of the school, who delivered 7 specimens, of whom 6 were refused. Zephyr had set the Duke's head to spinning, and the latter protested that were it to have cost $1 million to bugger the boy, he would have paid it in cash on the spot. He reserved to himself the lad's initiation, and it was generally granted him. O tender and delicate child, what disproportion and what a dreadful fate were in store for you. Celadon was the son of a magistrate of Nancy. He was captured at Luneville, whither he had gone to visit his aunt. He had just attained his 14th year. In this case, a girl was used to bait the trap. Celadon and she were introduced. The little wench drew him into the snare by feigning love for him. He was negligently chaperoned. The stroke was successful. Adonis was 15. He was ravished at Plessis, where he was enrolled in school. He was the son of a judge of the assize courts, who raised a great hue and cry. But all to no avail. The capture had been so nicely planned, no one knew a thing about it. Kerval, who had been mad about the child for 2 years, had made his acquaintance at his father's house, and it was he who had supplied the means and information necessary to debauch him. The others were greatly surprised to find such sensible good taste in a head so depraved as Kerval's, and he, most proud, profited from the event to show his colleagues that, as was plainly to be seen, he still could boast a sometimes fine palate. The child recognized him and fell to weeping, but the president consoled him with the assurance it would be to him would befall the deflowering, and while uttering these comforting words, he wobbled his enormous engine against those frail little buttocks. Kerval asked the assembly for the boy. His request was unopposed. Hyacinth was 14 years old. He was the son of a retired officer living in a small city in Champagne. He adored hunting and was taken while afield, his father having been so imprudent as to allow him to set out alone. Giton was 12. He was kidnapped at Versailles from amidst of the page boys at the king's stables. He was the son of a man of consequence from the Nivernais, who not 6 months prior had brought him to Versailles. He was very simply abducted while walking alone on the Avenue de Saint-Cloud. He became the bishop's passion, and to the bishop was the prize decreed.